Alright guys, so hello and welcome to this new and exciting tutorial on our latest template called World Travel Maps. And yet again, in this new version, it's even more powerful, more versatile, and as with every new release, I'm excited to show you how all of this works. So what I'm going to show you in this demo is how to create a really nice map animation that has tons of detail. We're going to start off by having an opening transition like this, and as the camera settles, we'll see a pin dropping here on our first location. Then here we'll also have a travel map itinerary, which will animate with our travel map animation. Then we're going to have an airplane flying from Dubai to Madrid. And as you can see, this guy has changed our second item. And then we're going to have an airplane going to Chicago. Then we zoom into our local area map. And from here, we'll see three cyclists, maybe members of a team or colleagues racing their way to Kansas City. And that's going to be the scope of our animation. Lots of moving parts, lots of cool little elements, but I'd be surprised if a complete After Effects beginner can't do this after watching this tutorial. Again, this would be pretty time consuming to create from scratch, maybe a day, maybe two, depending on your skill level. And we'll see how this tutorial goes, but hopefully we can knock this out in, 15-20 minute stops, even as I'm explaining all the logic and showing everything step by step. And alright, so let's get started. So as soon as you open the template, you'll be greeted by this beautiful dashboard, which you'll be coming back to again and again when designing the style of your map. For example, on this layer, you'll find a ton of settings where you can enable different color themes and then tweak all of their individual settings. Then a preview window to see all of those changes in real time. And then on this side, we have a couple of handy shortcuts you can use to quickly access different element comps. So say here you have your airplane layers. So if you double click on that, you'll find all of your airplane layers that you can copy and add to your travel map. Then we have this guy where you can grab an opening transition to use on a map. And then we have a few more, but I can get into that a little bit later as we're creating our animation. And then the last thing is probably this guy here where you have a drop-down menu to change the style of your pins. You see, each of the color themes come with their own pin design. However, if you want to, you can use this guy to override that and set your pin design to a different style. Like say this paper cutout style here. But for now, I'm going to leave that at style 04, which I think is from the lush green color theme. Alright, so that's the dashboard. And we can now jump into the actual video tutorial. So I'm going to jump into our project assets, expand this guy here, travel map comps, and here you'll see a couple of different examples that you can explore to see how they're built, but I'm going to be using this guy as a basis for our animation. First, I'll duplicate it to create a new copy, and I do that by going to Edit and then selecting this guy, or I can simply press Command D shortcut on my keyboard. And we're going to call it Demo. Right, so now let's open this up and we can see that there's a whole bunch of different layers here creating this whole animation that starts in London and then goes to New York and so on and so on and so on. We could just quickly edit these to match our animation, but I want to show you how to create everything from scratch. So I'm going to select them all and delete. So all we're left with is our camera controls, the camera itself, the two location layers, and our three layers that make up the airplane animation. Now, how do I explain this? I suppose I can start from the very top, camera controls. This is the layer that manages all of our camera animation in the scene. If I press the U key on the keyboard to reveal all of its animated keyframes, and get rid of these guys here, you can see that the camera animation is driven by these two keyframes. So let me show you how this is all set up. You see here we have two locations. We have the first location, which is London City. And then we have the second location on the map, which is New York. And that's our 2 pins. So then here in our camera animation tab, our camera has a bunch of these groups. Groups where you can set up each leg of the trip. So if I scrub through the timeline, I can see our first leg of the trip. And as you can see here, it says that its starting point is location 1, and the end point is a layer called location 2. And then we animate the camera between those 2 points using this slider here. As you can see here, all you need to do is make the first keyframe of the value of 1, as that stands for the first location, and then the second keyframe, set the value to 2. And that's all there is. That's all you need to do to create your camera animation. Now, at the same time, we can see that there's an airplane following our camera. Now, the airplane is made up of these 3 layers. So this is the airplane itself, then this guy is its shadow, and finally the route layer, which is the red line here and the shadow here. Now, I'll probably take a minute to go through these layers. So here we have the airplane, where you can change the icon design and have one that's more cartoony, or say a more realistic icon. And then we have our default one. We can change the scale of our icon. So say it's smaller, and then you can see that the shadow adjusts to that automatically. Then the shadow layer doesn't really have any effects except for this black fill. And then we have the route layer, which has a number of settings we can play with. So if we look up here, we have these 2 guys, which essentially define the airplane is starting and where its animation should end. If we look here, we can see that it's starting in location 1 and then ends in location 2. But I can just swap these around and let's see what happens. And as you can see, that's all it took us to reverse our animation. And it's just as easy as that. So coming back to our route layer, we have a couple more settings below. Here we set the animation type, and there are 2 types that you can choose from. The first one is based on camera, which means that the airplane uses these 2 keyframes to drive its animation. And in most cases, this is the setting that you'll be using. But say you had 2 airplanes where one was traveling faster than the other. In that case, you'd set the second airplane to use keyframes, and you could move its endpoint a little bit ahead in time so that it travels to its destination faster. You'll be using based on camera setting in most of the cases, but I thought I'd mention this just so you know how this works. And then we have this guy, which controls on which leg of the trip this airplane should animate on. As you see here on the camera controls, we have multiple legs to our trip. So at the moment, we only have 1 leg, which is going from location 1 to location 2. So when over here it's set to leg 1, it will use these 2 keyframes to animate the airplane. If we set it to leg 2, it currently gives us an error as we haven't set up the second leg yet. So I'll put this back to leg 1 and we'll see how this works in a second once we start adding the following legs to our trip. And then one last thing that we have here is the path height. So basically what I can do here is change the height or the curvature of our path. So if we set this to 130, it will get higher. And if we have a really short distance and you don't want the path to get too steep, you can set this to 70 or even a lower number. And so this is more or less how the camera and airplane animation are set up and how you animate them. I know this might sound a little complicated now, but this will make complete sense once we start building the rest of our animation. So let's go back to our example here and see what we need to create. Our first destination point is Dubai, and then the second one over here is Madrid. So let's start with that. I grab my location 1 and move it down like that. And I use my arrow keys to get it to its exact position. And then my second location is going to be here in Madrid, something like that. And if we go back, I can see that we now have our animation going from Dubai to Madrid. Perfect. So the only thing that I'm left to do here is rename these two guys. Now again, there's a bit of science and automation going on here, so let me give you a quick demo on that. I select my first location layer, I right click on it, go reveal, and select reveal layer source in project. That shows me the actual comp that's being used here. Now, if I want to change it to Dubai, I don't have to go into the comp and change anything there. It's all fully automated. So all that I have to do here is change this part of the name to Dubai. And that's it. And now if I want the title to be on the left side of the pin, I just change this word here to left. And as you can see, my title has now jumped to the left side of the pin. Now, I'm not sure if you caught it at the very start, but we had two vertical lines here in this name. Now, let me show you what that does. So, for example, if we have a really long name for a location, say something like this. I mean, that does look a little long, doesn't it? So what we can do here is add these two symbols, which if you're on a Mac, this key is located just above the Enter key. And that essentially creates a break in our line and drops the second line, giving us 2 lines on our animated title. So these are a couple of small things to remember, but as you get used to them, you'll see just how easy they make your life when you start building out your animation and it gets more and more complex. So I'll change this back to Dubai. And we go ahead and rename our second pin to Madrid. All right, and that's our first leg of the trip finished. Next, let's create our second leg of the trip. And to do that, I will take my second location, duplicate it, and I'll move this guy to the side here for now. Then I'm going to get my camera to animate to this third location by setting up the second leg of the trip. So we put location 2 as my starting point, and then my endpoint is going to be location 3. Now I offset my location layer here so it starts a little bit later. Then once Madrid animates in, I can establish a new keyframe here, and then a few seconds later we add another keyframe with a value of 3. And as you can see, my camera has just recentered to that point. So let's just move this to Chicago. Should be somewhere around here. And we're going to rename this guy to Chicago. Okay, so one thing that I need to do here is create an instance of our composition, because otherwise I'll be overriding our Madrid pin. So I simply duplicate this layer and I rename it to Chicago. And then with my location 3 layer selected in the timeline, I select my Chicago pin here in the assets. I press down the Alt key on the keyboard, and while holding it, I drag it over location 3. Release the Alt key, then the mouse, and as you can see, that has swapped out our 2 assets. And my Chicago pin is in place now. And so we have Madrid, and then the camera moves to Chicago. So all that I'm left to do here is create the airplane animation. And to do that, I'm going to grab these 3 layers, duplicate them, and we'll position them above location 2 so we can keep things organized. And you might get some errors to kind of show up here while the code is updating, but scrub through the timeline back and forth a few times and you'll see them disappear in a few moments. So again, to keep things organized, I'm going to rename my 3 new layers to leg 2. It's a bit of a pain, but trust me, this will make your life a lot easier when you have 8 or 10 locations and dozens of layers to deal with. Okay, so we have that. And the only other thing that I have to do here is select my route for leg 2. And it's airplane to go from location 2 to location 3. That's it. And yeah, also make sure that this second airplane has the second leg of the trip selected here. So if we scrub through the timeline, we can see that we have the second airplane and it now flies to Chicago. Now let's look back at our example, and the next thing that we need to create here is this zoom effect. So to do that, I will go back to my camera controls, and here at the top I have a camera zoom effect. So around here I will create my first keyframe, and then I'll go here 2 seconds later and I'll create the second keyframe. And I will define how much I want to zoom in, and I will set this to 100 as I want to zoom in 100% to our map. And that's it. These two keyframes are driving the whole animation, which is adding all the easing and keeping all of our icons at the same scale as the map is zooming in. And now that we've zoomed in, I can actually see that my Chicago pin is a little bit off, so let me adjust that. And then finally, we need to create an animation to our last point, which is Kansas City. So let's try to knock this out real quick now. I'll duplicate this to create our location 4. And if I zoom in, I can actually see that I have my cities turned off. So let me pop them back in real quick. Yeah, okay, and now I can see my cities, and I'll try to position this onto that black dot. Perfect. Now let's add the camera movement to this location, and in my third leg of the trip, I will be going from location 3 to location 4. And it will start just as our zoom is finished, and maybe a second later I create a new keyframe here on my animated trip. And then maybe another 4 or 5 seconds later, as we want our vehicle animation to be slower than the airplanes, we add another keyframe with the value of 4. And I move my 4th location layer to drop in just before the camera stops. Oh yeah, and let's rename our Chicago to Kansas City. Oh yeah, duplicate it. And then replace it like this. Beautiful. So next we need to get our vehicle, and vehicles like all the ground and water vehicles move a little bit different to the airplanes since they don't have that curvature on their route. So let me show you how to add a vehicle layer to our map. I go back to the dashboard, and then over here we have some shortcuts to different travel icons. So if I need to get a vehicle layer, I go to this comp. And if I scroll through the timeline, I can see that I have a bus and a path animating between these 2 points. So what I do here is I grab these 2 layers, press Command C, or go here and select copy. And then I come back to my animation comp and I paste them here between locations 3 and 4. Then rename them to leg 03. And then on the route path, I want to animate with the camera, and I want it to be part of a leg 3 animation. Now let's see where my layers are. And I can see they're over here real far away. Now there's 2 ways you can fix this. First, you can grab the route layer and reposition it like this to the center of our screen. And the other way that I kind of sometimes use is I get the position of this layer here, I copy it, and then I paste it back onto the position of my new route. So you can do this whichever way is easier for you. Now I double click on this route. And now I don't know where's the start and the end of this route, so okay, I see that now. It's the other way around. So let's move this guy here, that guy over here, and then these two guys somewhere here. If you want, you can take these middle points and delete them like this to create a straight line. But if you want to create an accurate route, then I'd do it like this. First, select all of the keyframes. Then while holding the Command or Control and Alt keys on your PC, you'll see how my cursor changes to this triangular icon. And if I click on either one of the points on my route, it changes the route from being a sharp to a Bezier curved, sort of smoothed like that. So personally, before starting to edit the shape of the route, I like to make it sharp. And I can then start adding more points while holding down the same Command Alt keys and clicking on the route. Okay, I think that's pretty close. Now again, I double click to select all of the keyframes and then turn my route into a smooth shape. Let's see this. Okay, looking good. Okay, so let's just change our vehicle from a bus to say a train. And the whole track changes to a train track. Change it to a sailboat, and once again we see a different design to its route. But we're going to change this guy to cyclist and perhaps make it a little bigger. And then the last thing we need to do is create 2 additional cyclists and offset them on our route. So to do that, I select my 2 vehicle layers and go Command D to duplicate them. Move them above, duplicate once again, and this gives me an error as the sequence is not correct. So you should always have your layers kind of grouped together, where the vehicle layer should be always above the route layer. And same goes for the airplanes, where the airplane should be above its shadow, which should be above its route. And as long as you keep them this way, everything should work and you should not see any errors like this. Now, I don't need to see these additional paths as they're all going to be following the same route, so I'll just switch them off. And now when it comes to my 2 additional cyclists, I don't want them to be traveling at the same speed as the camera or the first cyclist. Instead, I want to adjust their speed manually. So just like I showed earlier, I go to both of their route settings and change their animation type to use the keyframes. If I click U, that's my 2 keyframes, and let's just reposition them to make them move at the same speed as the camera. And now we can offset them a little bit. And if I scrub through this, I can see how they all start off at the same time, but as they get closer to their endpoint, they slowly start to spread out. And then maybe this very last one, we can tweak its speed even more, where it goes quickly in the beginning and then slows down towards the end. And so I think that's all of our animation done. Let's just preview this real quick. We start off in Dubai, then go to Madrid, Chicago, zoom in, and here's our guys cycling to their final destination. All right, so that's our map animation done. And next we can move to stylizing our map. For that, I'll switch back to our dashboard. I go to my map designer. And now I can change the look of my theme by using this guy over here. And I'm going to choose Tech White because it's a theme that gives me a really good starting point. You see, what I like about it is that it has this nice 3D depth to the map, and it has these kind of soft shadows here. So now with the theme selected, I can go into its settings and adjust it further. So as you can see here, it has a whole bunch of options that we can change. So you've like tons of room to create a map as customized as you need to. And I'm going to start by adjusting our watercolor to match that in our example. I think it's somewhere around here. Now, the next thing I want to do is give our water a bit of a texture. Like you see here, I'm going to change this texture here to topographic and drop its opacity to 20. And we're set. You can then use these other settings to change the color of the land, roads, borders, enable, disable the names of the cities, add terrain, clouds, and a lot more. But I think we're good on all that. So let's just change the color of our vehicles and their paths. And if I look back at my example, it's red. So I'm going to try to match that up. I go back to my vehicle, set that to a lighter red like that, and then set the flight path to the same color. And then just to illustrate it here, you can use these guys to adjust the design of each of the routes. Like set your flight path to be a solid line or a dotted line, change its thickness. And again, you can play around with these to find something that works for you. Okay, and then last thing here is the design of my pins. Now, I'm not too fond of them as I can't quite read their shape. So to adjust this, I'm going to go to our pin design layer here and change this guy to theme-based design. Okay, and we're good because this is exactly the same pin as in our example. Let's just preview this now. Okay, that's looking great. So I'm becoming aware that this tutorial is starting to stretch out a bit. So how about we park it here, and I'll continue with our transitions and UI elements in the following video. So thanks for hanging in this far, and I'll see you in the next video.